Chief Teegee, thank you so much for joining us. First of all, what's your position on the Prime Minister's plan to build a pipeline from Alberta to the coast of BC?
Well, I think certainly as many First Nations here in British Columbia's position is that we're not in support of a northern pipeline that goes to the northwest coast. And this was really, I think we need to be reminded that it was kind of a trade-off with the development of TMX, that a tiger ban was implemented back in 2019. This was also part of the 1985 legislation in regards to a tanker zone that was really about 100 kilometers off the shores of British Columbia. So our position hasn't changed, and certainly support not only the coastal First Nations, but also many of the First Nations that are concerned and on the mainland in terms of an actual right-of-way for a pipeline.
And is there anything the government can offer to gain support of First Nations in BC who will be directly affected by this pipeline if it gets built?
I'm not sure at this point. This discussion really was born out of Daniel Smith's, Premier of Alberta's position in an MOU with the Government of Canada to look at a potential pipeline. I think right now it's merely a pipe dream, and many First Nations don't have the appetite for an oil pipeline. Rather, many First Nations there in British Columbia are concentrating on many of the projects that are real. Out of the 15 projects that were listed last year by the Prime Minister as ones of national importance, 9 are here in British Columbia, and many of those have either participation or are led by First Nations. So I would say let's concentrate on those major projects that really are in reality.
Do you think this plan affects other First Nations rights in other parts of Canada?
Yeah, I think certainly. We've definitely heard from some of the First Nations in Alberta that are interested in oil development and oil pipelines. But at the same time, First Nations rights here in British Columbia are paramount in terms of how development occurs. We do have the United Nations Declaration Act federally and the Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act provincially. So as far as we're concerned, these laws exist and requires are a free, prior, and informed consent in how development occurs. And that's not just pipelines, it's any major development in our respective territories.
And what's your message to the Prime Minister and Premier of Alberta who've been pushing this plan forward?
I think we need to not only concentrate on existing infrastructure, like certainly the ones that exist haven't been fully utilized. There are ongoing projects that are real and need to be resourced and properly, brought forward in terms of consultation or free, prior, and informed consent in terms of how decisions are made. And I think it's really important to understand that First Nations here in British Columbia, we have many different arrangements. Many of the territories here, especially in the North Coast, are unceded, unsurrendered, continually occupied territories. And, our people have lived here for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Election cycles come and go. But our First Nations who, have a right to say how development occurs will be here long after the Carney government is gone and long after the EV government is gone. We won't leave our territories. This is where we're born out of, and this is where we belong. So this is why the general public need to understand why many of the First Nations, such as the coastal First Nations and many First Nations that are talking about oil development, are really wanting a careful, thoughtful, an important decision, especially how development occurs. So this is why we take it so important, and ultimately we do uphold our rights, title, and interests in many of these territories, including the North Coast.
Important discussion for sure there. Chief Teegee, we will have to leave it there, but thank you very much for taking some time for us today.
You're welcome.